The Behemoth Brewing Company presents the Department of Conversation with Pat Brittenden. Behemoth, give me something hoppy.
It is Saturday evening in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It is Saturday morning in the UK. Now we've got some people joining us for our live stream from the UK. Kia ora whānau and welcome to the Department of Conversation and our very special guest, intrepid explorer and documentary filmmaker, Anthony Powell. Good evening and welcome, sir.
Good evening. Yeah, glad to be here.
Thank you so much for jumping in and having a chat with us. I found out about you. I've like most of us, we've seen your work in all sorts of places all over the world a lot. You know, all you got to do is look at your bio, which we will be doing as we're chatting, but we've seen you over the place. But I got to find out more about you quite recently when someone said, Pat, you should go and talk to this guy, Anthony. He's got all this wicked information about Antarctica and, you know, it'd be a great chat. And so that was my introduction to you, and graciously you've accepted to come on board and have a bit of a chat. But I kind of want to start by talking about you and your life and how you got to what you're maybe mostly doing now. So thanks for joining us and welcome.
Yeah, great to be here. So I was originally, straight out of high school, I went in an apprenticeship with Telecom New Zealand and started training as a communications tech for many years. And so I was working in Hawera there, Southern Taranaki. And after quite a few years doing that, about 15 or 16 years doing that job, saw the internal advertising for someone to go down to Scott Base and look after the communication system down there for a year. And, I was always fascinated by Antarctica, but really knew very little about it other than, the stories of Scott dying and Hillary making it to the South Pole. Other than that, I pretty much didn't know anything. But I was into, tramping, hiking around, a lot of that, and it just seemed like a big adventure. So I stuck my name in the hat and, eventually got the job down there. It was a 1-year contract. Wasn't actually keen on spending a whole year there, and going into the straight unknown and the frozen wilderness and being stuck for 6 months with no way out. But it was a choice of a 1-year contract or nothing, basically. So, I took the dive, and as it turned out, I actually really enjoyed the winter a lot more than the summer.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I knew we had the 24-hour daylight in the summer, and the temperatures were reasonable, but then you read about temperatures of -60 in the middle of winter and big storms and no daylight, and the idea just didn't appeal to me at all. But having actually done the winter the first time, absolutely loved it.
I would think that even though it's dark 24/7, that it wouldn't mess with your sleep patterns as much as if it was light 24/7.
No, the 24-hour darkness was probably easier to get used to than the 24-hour daylight.
Right.
Because, if you're sitting in there 24-hour daylight and you do get used to it, but, you step outside into the bright sunlight and it kind of tries to reset your body clock on you. After a while, you do get used to it, though. If you're sleeping in a tent outside, after a couple of days, your brain just sort of adapts and knows, okay, when the sun's in that direction, it's still the middle of the night, go back to sleep kind of thing. And when it's, coming in over here, time to wake up. But in the winter, it probably, in some ways, it's probably not too much different from down in Dunedin there, where, a lot of people are driving to work in the dark in the middle of winter and spend all day under fluorescent lights and then drive home in the dark. So, and in that respect, in some ways, it was easier to get used to. And plus you've just got the amazing auroras and things to see on occasion, and nacreous clouds, and just really amazing colors that happen over the winter and in the shoulder months, because summertime mostly it's just bright, harsh sunlight and not a lot of variety.
Yeah, I do relate it a tiny bit being in Dunedin. Obviously, for people who are joining us, and you're in Christchurch, which is about a 4 to 5 hour drive further north in the South Island of New Zealand than where I am, because our longest stay is 16 hours. And so that 16 hours still has a dusk and a dawn either side. So it's more like sort of 19, 20 hours of not night. And our shortest day, I think, is about 8.5. So yeah, I don't relate obviously to 24 and 24, but those longest days sometimes, and what I've experienced is because I work from home, quite often I'll be working on my laptop. All of a sudden I've got my laptop on my lap, ironically, and I'm sitting on my couch because sometimes I work in different places of the house. It feels like you're not working so much. And I'm like, shit, I feel really hungry. And I realize it's 9:15 at night and I haven't stopped working because it's still, the sun's still right there and it's still a good, maybe hour away from being actual beyond the hills and out of sight. And so I think I can kind of understand without it quite experiencing what you've experienced.
Yeah, there's definitely, there is that aspect to it. If you're at the base itself, it's a fairly regimented routine of everyone starts work at 8 o'clock in the morning. Breakfast is served at 7 in the morning, dinner's served at 5:30 or 6 at night. It varies a bit from one year to the next, but so you do keep that regular routine going, which helps you quite a bit. But as soon as you get away from the base, if you're working in the field for a couple of weeks, then you have to really sort of concentrate on keeping a bit of a routine up.
I kind of want to talk to you in 3 parts today because I'm really interested in your story and this department of conversation. That's what we do. We talk to interesting people about their stories. I also have so many questions about Antarctica, and then there is this little subset of a conversation that you already know what I'm going to talk to you about. And part of the reason we've connected is there's this whole world of the flat Earth, and basically for the flat Earth to exist, you have to either be a liar or a shill from NASA. That's really the two realistic things. So I do want to talk about that as well. But this is not like a flat Earth podcast or a debunking podcast, because you're a fascinating person, because like you said, you started working sort of as a telco technician, my word not yours, in 1983 I think it was, and then you went off to Antarctica and then you kind of stayed there. But then the other thing is you started being a full-time sort of professional filmmaker, but that wasn't until 2009. So someone who starts their professional career in 83 and then what's that, 26 years later starts another professional career as a filmmaker, and since then, I described you the other day, and tell me if I'm wrong, but it feels like you're maybe the person on the face of the planet with more, and when I say private, I mean you're not Discovery Channel, but more private stock footage of Antarctica than possibly anybody else. Would that be fair?
Probably reasonable description. I've got stacks and stacks of hard drives of material here, but. Yeah, so, I found that when I was working in Antarctica, there's always visiting film crews. And like prior to going there, I'd always been into photography, but not a huge amount. I've always kept up with technology and stuff. But then my first couple of years, I was shooting things on slide film. And the biggest problem was you'd shoot all this film for a whole year. Then you get back to New Zealand, get it all developed, and you see all the mistakes that you've made. And, there's a lot of technical problems you have too with just the film being so cold and brittle in the winter. It's really easy to snap it inside the camera. And then things you don't expect, like static electricity, because the air is so incredibly dry. Basically, the temperature's below freezing all the time, so when all the moisture in the air is frozen, so it's incredibly dry. And so when you wind a plastic film, it generates static, so it'll actually have little sparks appear inside the camera, especially if it's a motor drive on it. So you get quite a few films come back with little sparks of lightning type things appearing on the photos. So lots of those sorts of problems. But when the digital cameras came along, it just made a huge difference, real game changer, being able to see this instantly what was happening straight away. And it was like the first couple of years, I also got roped into providing a photo a day for the International Antarctic Centre back in Christchurch. And, doing that knowing that there's going to be lots of people looking at a photo that you're taking every day is probably the number one thing that improved my photography skills. And that's generally the advice I give people too. If you want to get better at photography, take a photo every day. Just systematically do it, and you'll see what you're doing wrong. Practice, and try not to take too much stuff. Just concentrate on getting one good photo you're happy with every day, and you'll soon see your skill levels just starts climbing.
And I guess there's nothing like the pressure of your photo getting seen as well to make sure you get it just right.
Yeah, and that made a huge difference. And then, so then around 2003, over the winter there, I had a Minolta Damage 7, which was a 5 megapixel camera and was really high tech at the time. And I figured that if I took a photo with that, it was actually good enough resolution to hold up on a movie screen, which is, the equivalent of HD video. Yeah. And so then I had the idea of, well, I could actually try shooting time lapse with this, because I'd always been fascinated with time lapse as a kid. So I grabbed a few spare parts, a little 555 timer chip that anyone who's into electronics will know all about, and just built a little remote shutter control for it so I could trigger it, once a minute or every 10 seconds, and just really amazed with the results I was getting. So then I just shot more and more of that every year, and I was giving out little video discs to people to take home as mementos, and finally basically got it nailed after a few years of doing that, and shot more and more footage until I felt like I was at the point where I had enough footage to really tell the story visually of what it's like to be there for a year. And then after that, I actually spent a couple of years filming the people to tell the human story to go along with that.
Right.
And to actually make the movie.
So let's have a look at one of your websites. This is antarcticimages.com. This is obviously not all of your products, but this is a series of images that you've taken. Do you think at the moment, when people are using your stock imagery, are they more likely to use, what gets used more, video or still images that you've taken?
Absolutely, video.
Really?
I've had huge amounts of video go to all sorts of movies. I'm just trying to think. Just in the last couple of years, there's been like the Disney Nature Penguins one. I've got footage in that one. National Geographic's Continent 7 Antarctica. A huge amount of the B-roll footage on that is all stuff I shot. If it's, there's guys following people around with the cameras on their shoulders, and they cut to all the other scenery and footage to go along with it to tell the stories. And a huge amount of stuff in that is all stuff that I shot. There's the exhibition type films like Dinosaurs in Antarctica. There's of course, BBC's Planet Earth series was probably a pretty significant one for me, because at the time, the BBC film crew there were visiting, and I was working at McMurdo Station, and I was kind of known as a go-to guy for photography and filming stuff at McMurdo Station by then.
Were you still working as the telco specialist at that point, though? That was sort of your side hustle, was the photography and video.
Yeah, it was just a hobby on the side. And then, the NSF, actually National Science Foundation, which is a US government agency that runs McMurdo Station, they were keen for me to help out the BBC folk here and there. So I was, having a lot of talks with them and showing things to them to film, that sort of thing. And they bought a bunch of footage off me to use in the Planet Earth series, or rather the Frozen Planet series. And yeah, once I actually had that on my credits list, that actually opened a lot of other doors in terms of getting my own film made.
Which is what we're looking at right now. The bottom
Yeah,
of your ants work is like you've got National Geographic as your customers: National Geographic, Discovery, BBC, Disney, TVNZ, whoop whoop, US Natural History Museum, International Antarctic Centre, NZ Antarctic Heritage Trust, and University of Canterbury. I'm sure how we should finish that is to say, but to name a few.
yeah. There's a lot of others, but yeah, it's probably it's you don't really make a living off selling stock footage, but it does help cover a lot of your background costs,
Right.
in terms of replacing all the camera gear and keeping up to date. In fact, you actually don't make a huge amount of money off being a filmmaker unless you're like a top tier Hollywood person.
Hello, Peter Jackson.
Yeah, because some people seem to think I make lots of money being a filmmaker, but no, I actually only make, when I was working at McMurdo Station as their satellite engineer, I was making about 3 times what I make now as a filmmaker.
Wow.
But the thing is, I'm just doing what I enjoy.
Well, there's that old saying, isn't it? Find something you love and you'll never work another day in your life. Something like that, at least, anyway. So you at 2009, you start doing filmmaking. You obviously then become a professional. I would think you obviously change your kit, you change your gear, you get better equipment. And was it 2012? Was it 2012 that you then made your documentary A Year on Ice?
I did a couple of. I went it in 2009. Then I actually took a year off because I'd actually just finished doing 7 winters back to back at that point, and
Wow.
I'd also come down the previous summer on the Artists and Writers Grant. So at that point, I was getting a little bit toasty, needed a break, so I took a year off, and in that time started to sort of render a lot of the time-lapse footages properly, because the computers then were nowhere near where they are now, and you'd spend like half a day to render one single time-lapse clip. So spent quite a bit of time doing that, and then did another season as avionics tech at the airfield at McMurdo, and then did another season as a comms tech, just working on all the radio systems at McMurdo, the radio repeaters and stuff, lots of flying around in helicopters. And then was at that point, I'd also been asked to stay on extra to film certain things like the ship offload for the National Science Foundation, because at that year their usual ice period pretty much melted, where they unload all the annual supplies, and they had to have the military guys come in and build the floating causeway to offload all the cargo onto. So that was the first time they'd tried that, and they wanted it all documented. So I stayed on and filmed all that for them, which I ended up using that footage in the film in the end. And so then it was, after that, it was pretty much about a year's work to get the film finished off.
Wow.
And get it out into theaters. Yeah.
And it's great. Listen, and I know this is because we've got people coming from around the world. The chat's going bananas there, which is great. Hey to all you guys. But here in New Zealand, if you go to Prime Video, which for people who don't know is the Amazon platform, and you look up Antarctica, there you go. You pop up right there. This is your documentary, Antarctica, A Year on Ice. The most important question for me is, do you spell Antarctica correctly every time? I always miss out that first C. There's something wrong with that. No, I'm not.
I did miss it out once, actually.
Okay.
there is a video on YouTube where I actually accidentally missed it out on screen, but I haven't bothered deleting it.
So if you're in New Zealand, and listen, maybe if any of you guys are looking on from the UK right now, if you're a Amazon subscriber, you can jump on your computers and have a look, and they can tell us maybe.
Yeah, if it's available in the UK and New Zealand. It's also available in the US. It's got a different cover picture in the US version because it's a different distributor there. Other countries, I'm not too sure of. It seems to be a bit of a mix and match because North America is one distributor, and then the rest of the world is another distributor based in Sydney that seem to do things one country at a time. So it's and I really just can't keep up with what they're doing, really.
On the actual filmmaking, this is a question I was going to ask you, but the bemused one who is with us in the chat right now has asked the question as well. I know a little bit about the answer to this, but I'd like you to maybe expand on this. The bemused one says, do you need special electronics for those weather conditions? I assume you do. Now, can you explain to us what you do? Because I'm of the understanding that not only do you need special electronics, but maybe one of the reasons you're a sought-after person to go and to film is you actually manufacture, you kind of make and invent technology that can then survive those conditions, don't you?
Yeah, so it's there's quite a bit to it, but the biggest one, of course, is just the batteries. Like typically your mobile phones and your smaller cameras, like your GoPros, any little action cams that have the low voltage batteries in them that run on 3.5 or 5 volts, tend to fail pretty fast in the cold. And then the bigger cameras, it's pretty much trial and error, really, as to whether it's going to keep going. So I started out, like the majority of A Year on Ice, I actually filmed on my old Canon 5D Mark II. And that was working in -50, no problems. The battery life would be severely reduced, and generally had to use manual lenses, because once you got below about -35, -40 Celsius, you could hear them really grinding inside, trying to work the aperture and the iris, or trying to, the autofocus would just did not sound pleasant at all. So using the fully manual lenses was definitely the way to go. And then, but the big one is most of the time I'll use a external power supply, like a 12-volt battery pack, run it through a little voltage regulator, then hook it up to the battery and feed it up inside the camera, so I know I'm supplying a constant voltage. But there's around about -40 most cameras will go to. My Sony A7R II consistently failed at -32 Celsius outside and went into a full factory reset every time, whereas my Sony A7S would go down to -55, no problem. Then pretty much all the Panasonic gear I've been using has been great. So it's a lot of trial and error. So it's
a madness number. I think for people who might be picking us up from the US, I think we cross over. Because I know that -40 Fahrenheit is it's about -40. Yeah. So if you're hearing -40 in Fahrenheit or Celsius, it's the same. So they're crazy numbers. So does that mean you go out with a camera? You must. No, I say you must. You go out with multiple cameras, because I would think you go out with a camera because you want to shoot something, and that camera dies. Is that like, are you done for the day, or do you have to go back to whatever vehicle you're in and get the backup sort of thing?
I pretty much always have at least 2 cameras on me. Like last time I was down there, I was doing a bunch of filming at one of the penguin colonies, and I'd normally have 5 or 6 cameras on me. And then I'd actually set a few out on tripods as I walk down the length of the colony, hit record and leave them running, so as you can get the natural behaviors of the animals doing their things in long periods. And then I'd have one extra my best camera I'd sort of keep on me all the time and use that for a combination of stills and video. But I've found that I have a preference for, rather than trying to chase the action, especially down there, is to just record a lot now. And that way you're having absolutely minimal impact on any of the animals, because part of the Antarctic Treaty is, unless you're specifically doing study for a research group that's been permitted, you don't do anything that's going to affect the natural behavior of the animals. So I find a good way of doing that is to just, you always keep your distance, use decent lenses that you can zoom in enough but then just walking away from it and leaving them to do their own thing. And the difference what you will get from that versus someone standing there even a reasonable distance away, it is fairly unique.
Yeah. There's one of the questions I've got, and maybe this would be a good time to move into this part of this conversation around Antarctica specifically. You start your documentary with a quote: "To understand the place properly, you really need to spend 1 full year down here on the ice." So for someone who's done that, there is a part of the documentary where obviously there is a seal in distress, and the voiceover kind of goes, we can't help. And I was thinking the same thing that someone in the room that I was watching it said at the same time, which is, I wonder why that is. You've sort of explained it, but I still wouldn't mind asking the question, because obviously with the base being there, that already impacts the animals in some kind of a negative way. So then where do you draw the line, and how do you draw the line to go, well, we're already impacting them negatively with our boats turning up and our planes turning up, but that one we'll just leave alone to take whatever the natural course from there is.
Oh, the general rule of thumb is if you're on foot, you stay a minimum of 10 meters away from any wildlife. And that's kind of the point which they'll ignore you. Occasionally you'll get a penguin or something, if you're out and about, will run over to see what you're doing and have a look at you and run around your feet. But in that case, your normal course of action is just stand still, let it do its thing till it's fulfilled its curiosity, and then carry on. With that seal, it's it's the number one complaint I've had from the movie is that seal actually.
Help the seal.
Some people just calling me a heartless bastard. How could you stand back and do nothing? The thing is, under the National Science Foundation U.S. law, if I'd done anything there, I would have been liable for $100,000 fine and jail time. So number one.
My question is not based out of thinking you should have done anything. I was just, I was kind of thinking, you guys obviously know that the bright lights of the they would do things like attract the animals, I would think. So there is some negative being caused. I just wondered. So basically, you accept that there is a negative impact, but even accepting that the rules are don't try and fix the negative impact by doing a positive.
And then generally speaking, the bases don't, especially McMurdo Station Scott Base, the bases generally don't have much of an impact on the wildlife because they're further south than any of the penguin colonies. It's pretty rare to see penguins around there. We occasionally do. We do see the Weddell seals on the sea ice right in front of the base, and other marine life is just there in the water. Pretty much all the wildlife disappears for the winter when the sea freezes over. The seals all lose their breathing holes, so light isn't so much of a problem, although personally I would like to see the amount of light from the bases reduced, just to reduce light pollution in general. And that particular seal, that was about 10 k's inland across the ice shelf where the seals never normally go, and there would be absolutely no sign of the airfield there to that seal until it got within, maybe half a mile or 1K away down at ground level at the most. So it was already way off track and lost when it got there. And the thing is, that was obviously a pup. And what happens is basically the pups need to be weaned within, I'm not sure of the exact number. If there's any seal scientists on there, they may be able to comment, but I think it's about 7 or 8 weeks in, because the mother will basically lose about half its body mass in feeding the pup and providing the milk. And at that point, if the pup's not weaned, the mother will abandon it because it's going to die otherwise. And so there is actually a huge number of pups that just get left behind to die every year. So that would have been one of those seal pups, which you can tell it's a really skinny, and it's basically calling out for its mother, saying, "Come and feed me."
And I don't want to I was going to say beat a dead horse. That might be an inappropriate analogy for this kind of questioning. But there's one other thing I want to ask about the animals, just because I'm interested. I'm wondering if there are different ratings for the importance. So as we were watching that clip, I thought, what if it was like a whale that had a fishing thing caught around its flipper or something? Is it still don't touch it, wouldn't help? Or are there some scales that maybe people can get involved? And again, not a criticism, I'm just really wondering.
I'm not too sure what the policy for that one would be, because possibly if it's already caught in something that's man-made, it would be acceptable to go and free it. So that's the sort of thing where you'd actually radio back to the base and then actually get permission. If, like in New Zealand, they may want to go and ask MFAT or for approval to do something major like that. But there's also the big safety concern, because you jump in the water with a whale and you get injured. It's not the best medical facilities to look after you there, and providing a medevac is a huge thing. So there's all these things to weigh up all the time. I know one year I was at McMurdo Station over the winter, and there was a Weddell seal came up and was just running around all the buildings at the station there in the dark. This was after the sea had pretty much frozen back over again, and people were almost walking into it in the dark, surprising it, and quite likely to get bitten. And at that point, they got permission from the National Science Foundation to actually go and use some of the equipment from the seal studies over the summer to basically capture it and take it back to the edge of the ocean where it could get in the water, because it was becoming an actual danger to the people physically present there. So there are, they will make judgment calls from time to time. It's just a matter of coming up with the minimal impact as much as they can.
Just to not jump ahead to the third part of the conversation, the flattest part of the conversation, but there are people who are already talking about your 24-hour footage and the editing. Just to give people a heads up, we are going to talk about that, and we might, if we can figure it out, have a bit of a world exclusive where Anthony might show us the original footage unedited of that 24-hour cycle. So for the flatties or the anti-flatties or whatever it is who are watching, if you know what I'm talking about, there may be a world exclusive coming up for you guys, so stand by. Right, Antarctica. In your documentary, it showed very sad situation where someone found out that their parent had died. Yeah. And obviously if you're there over winter, you can't, it's a kind of a bit like COVID. You can't go to the funeral. You're stuck where you are. You can't move on. I was thinking about, and these must be the questions that everybody asks, but what happens if someone dies on the base? What happens then?
It's been a long time since that's happened. I think the last time I know of would have been 1996 or 97. And that was during the winter. At least, in terms of McMurdo Station or Scott Base, there was someone died at the South Pole in 2001, I think it was. But in that case, it was just a case of, basically put the body in storage until the flights resume, and then fly them back out to New Zealand.
And so we were watching a movie the other night which was pretty heinous, so forgive this question, but has there ever been that you know of at any of the bases like a serious assault or murder on Antarctica down there?
I know of a couple of assaults that have happened. So far as I know, there's never been a murder. There's just a couple of years ago, I know there was an assault happened over on the Antarctic Peninsula. I'm not sure of the details there. I'm sure you could Google the details there. But it's, just two people getting progressively more and more annoyed with each other.
So if there is like a crime, if there is a crime that what we would call in, not Antarctica, a crime, what happens? What happens with the criminal activity?
Basically, the last one that I know of that happened at McMurdo was in the 90s, and they basically sent down federal marshals from the US and escorted them back to the States. So there's, there at McMurdo Station, the National Science Foundation station manager is also deputized as a U.S. Marshal just in case something happens. So they are able to legally take action if they need to. And typically what happens is each base will apply the laws of their home country to that base. So if something happens at Scott Base, the same legal requirements as New Zealand will take precedent at Scott Base.
And Scott Base is the same time as New Zealand, isn't it? Is it a toll call to call there?
It's sorry?
Is it a toll call? If I have to call you at Scott Base?
It is. Yes. Yes, you can actually direct dial Scott Base. And it's fairly expensive. It's about the same as calling a mobile from a landline, because the satellite bandwidth is horrendously expensive down there. Because that's another whole interesting thing. People think there's millions of satellites down there. Why does it cost so much? Without getting too technical, basically, in order to use a satellite at the South Pole, you need the geostationary ones that are way out above the equator, and typically your geostationary satellites just have a footprint to cover small sections of the world at once. Say New Zealand to show the Sky satellite TV, or Eastern Australia or something like that, and they'll have about 4 or 5 dishes on them, but then they'll have another dish that'll be extremely high power, relatively speaking, that covers the whole globe. And those ones are horrendously expensive to buy bandwidth on. And that's what you need to cover all these little unpopulated areas that are in the middle of nowhere. And once you get about as far south as Scott Base or McMurdo Station, that's about as far south as you can go and get a reliable satellite signal before the curvature of the Earth actually gets in the way. So at the South Pole itself, a good satellite above the equator is actually just over the horizon, whereas at Scott Base it's about 3 degrees above the horizon, so you can just get a clear enough signal punching through all the atmosphere to get a good signal there. Whereas the South Pole, they basically rely on old satellites where their orbits are decaying, so over the course of a day the satellite's wobbling in the sky a bit, and for a few hours it dips down until it's above the horizon. So they'll get periods where they have a good satellite signal for 4 or 5 hours, and then it goes away again while it wanders up onto the other half of its decayed orbit, sort of thing.
Crazy. Being there in Antarctica over winter, do you need to get like vitamin D supplements and B12 shots, that kind of stuff, because you're not seeing the sun at all?
Yeah, some people do. There was a study done one year when I was there, and at the time the recommended daily dosage was, probably don't quote me on these figures because I'm recalling from way back, but I think it was something like 400 IUs a day was the recommended daily dosage. And they did tests where they gave people, placebos, and gave people high doses and medium sort of dose, and they basically came back with, I think it was about 1,000 IUs a day was what was good to maintain over the winter. Otherwise, it's the combination of the lack of vitamin D and then basically becoming institutionalized with the repetitive jobs over the winter, and your polar T3 syndrome, where your T3 growth hormone gets drawn away from the brain and into your core system to keep your body going. You sort of, your short-term memory tends to go. You forget common everyday words. You'll be sitting there.
Just on that as an example, in your documentary, it showed someone saying, so they call it the T3 events. about short-term memory. Someone said that they told the story for people who are watching to get an understanding that they sat there for 10 minutes trying to figure out if S was before T or T was before S in the alphabet. And I mean, like, no one can fathom that, I guess, unless you're going through it.
Yeah, and like I've having conversation over dinner, and you say, "Oh, can you pass the that white stuff, in the container, the salt? Yeah, the salt. That's it. Yeah."
I could never go because I'm constantly going to my kids. Oh, go, that room with the washing machine in it that washes our clothes. That room. Go into that room. Or like go to the cupboard that's got the food because I can't remember the word pantry. I'd be a mess from day one.
Yeah. So like I've had situations with myself, especially something extremely technical. If you're trying to read a technical manual in late winter, it's really hard because I had one of the microwave radio systems go faulty, and it was just running on the standby, and I had to fix the main amplifier for it, and just trying to read through a extremely detailed technical manual. You'd sit there staring at the page for half an hour, and your eyes just glaze over, and it's pretty hard.
Now you met your wife in Antarctica, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And am I right? Sorry, there was a part of the documentary I had to go out of the room, but you got married there as well?
Yep. Well, yeah. You
got married. You met your wife and then got married in Antarctica.
Yeah, it was interesting legally because we actually did quite a bit of research into it. Just to make sure it was all above board, we signed papers back in when we got back to New Zealand to make sure it was completely legal, because under the New Zealand Births, Deaths and Marriages Act at the time, I was talking to whoever it was in that department, and we're having conversations, say, okay, what's the legal requirements? And they actually said, well, under New Zealand law, part of the Ross dependency, which is the New Zealand original territorial claim from back in the day, you can be declared legally dead in New Zealand if you die in Antarctica. You'll be a citizen of New Zealand if you're born in the Ross dependency, but marriage was not defined at all. So he said technically it could be done, but it could be challenged in a court of law afterwards.
Now your wife is American, and in the video, I don't want to do too many spoilers. People can go see the documentary, but in the documentary, I think it's her father is being seen either talking on a cell phone or on some kind of communication. So you'd never met him because we missed out of it. Didn't you meet her and get married on the same trip there? So it wasn't like you came away and courted in New Zealand and then went back again, but you met her and got married.
No, we had met earlier, but we'd basically not been a couple at all. And then it was later we got together, and then just decided, well, okay, yeah, let's get married. And,
so the decision from partnership to marriage was in one period in Antarctica?
Not really. No, we'd been together a little while. The decision that getting engaged to getting married, that was like 6 weeks.
Okay. And I was wondering, because obviously that would be your father-in-law. And how did that go once you left Antarctica? I'm assuming you had met him. How did that go after you'd married his daughter, hadn't met him, and then you did?
No, it was fine. It was, he's interesting guy, because that was actually Christine, my wife, who is saying about her father dying. So that was actually. A couple of winters later, when we were there for the winter, and then it was early winter. I think it was April or maybe May, and we still had months and months to go of isolation. And it was just sort of one morning her grandmother called to say that, oh, your dad's just died. And that was, that's probably the number one biggest thing about spending time down there, is just not being able to be there for those big family events, or both the good and the bad.
Yeah.
The bad ones are way more gut wrenching, but just all my nephews and nieces growing up and missing big chunks of that sort of thing, because we don't have any kids of our own, which is was a conscious decision. But I've already got 27 nephews and nieces, so I didn't really feel the need to add more to the global population myself.
So you're talking about the being stuck, not being able to get back. It kind of does bring me back to the sort of the end of this conversation around Antarctica, because you're going back. And you told me you're basically here in New Zealand. For people who are watching internationally, people arrive in our country and then they spent 2 weeks in managed isolation for the COVID outbreak. But you going to Antarctica, you're going to have to do your managed isolation in Christchurch before you leave. Is that right?
Yep.
Because I was thinking about that. That means there's a few windows of risk, aren't there? You leave managed isolation, you have to get to the plane, you have to get on board. So there's some more risk, but I guess it's still
pretty good plan in place. No plan is absolutely perfect.
Sure.
For people coming from the US, they're going into the standard MIQ managed isolation. For people from New Zealand, we're doing managed isolation, but it's not the MIQ one. So it's a separate one that's being provided. And then everyone, because the US and New Zealand share planes, it's sort of fly from Christchurch down to Ross Island there. And the air crew is actually kept separate from all the passengers. So the air crew for the likes of the C-17 and the other planes have all been through isolation to get into New Zealand, and so they have separate toilet facilities on the plane for the air crew, and separate ones for the passengers, and everyone's wearing their N95 masks on the plane. And then once you actually get there, you'll have tests on your arrival, and just after day 3, I think it is. And they have separate meal times for the new arrivals versus the people who are already there, and basically keeping all the staff separate until everyone's returned the negative test after arriving as well. It'd be a pretty serious thing if we had a COVID outbreak down there, because it's just such close living quarters that it would actually go through everyone.
Have they had vaccinations down there, or have they not, because it's not warranted yet?
There's everyone going to Scott Base has to be vaccinated. So I've had my first jab. I'm getting my next one on Tuesday. Then with McMurdo, because up until a few days ago it wasn't an officially approved vaccine, they couldn't enforce that. So I don't know what the status is now. But yeah, that's basically they're trying to do everything they can to just keep COVID out of there, because the hospital facilities on site just wouldn't be able to keep up. And there's a potential of being stuck there for weeks if the weather closes in. So it'll be not a good picture.
Yeah. And why are you going back? What are you doing?
Going back as a full-time videographer at Scott Base for this summer. So filming a lot of stuff for various documentary programs and education outreach. Plus, one of the things I'm doing that I'm really keen on is actually just fully documenting the existing base before they start the construction on the new base. So establishing really thorough historical records. So doing 360 VR, super high resolution photos, photogrammetry of the whole base, and just making sure absolutely everything is well documented. Plus, the main thing I'm going to be doing is traveling with each of the visiting science groups and documenting the research they're doing, so then they can use that for their education outreach, and I can use that footage as well myself.
It's fascinating. You have a fascinating life. I'm jealous. I think that one of the reasons that I'm fascinated about certain sectors of the world thinking that things like people can't go to Antarctica unless they're in the army, which is a thing you hear from people who believe in a flat Earth. Now, for people who are listeners and viewers of my regular podcast, you might think that this conversation is going to take a bit of a strange tack, but there's a reason for it. So it's interesting. Bear with us anyway. Is that we live in New Zealand. We have whole tourism sectors set up to taking everyday people to Antarctica, down in cruise ships during the summer months and stuff. So we here in New Zealand know that it's nonsense to say people can't go there and you have to be an elite or an elite soldier to be able to be let down there and stuff. It's utter nonsense. So it's one of those places I would love to go one day, but I imagine as the older I get and the less able I become, I think for me, probably they don't need too many podcasters down there, I would think. So perhaps it's going to be on a cruise ship one day. But speaking of that, you obviously have been, I don't know if target's the right word, but certainly you've been someone who has had their interactions with the flat Earth world. When you put out the documentary, or in and around that time, this is a tweet of yours that says, how to unwittingly piss off thousands of people who believe the Earth is flat. Post a video of the 24-hour sun in Antarctica, which also happens to disprove their model of the world. The comments are a fun read, you say, with, I think, a little bit more slightly tongue in your cheek. So let's just set this up. And once I saw that you'd had a little bit of an interaction, I thought, you know the drill. You know what's going on now. So for people who don't know, there are genuinely people on the world who believe that the Earth is flat. For them to believe the Earth is flat, there can't be 24 hours of sunlight in Antarctica. The model doesn't work. They believe the ring around the outside of the Earth is what they would class as we would think is Antarctica, and therefore if that whole ring is lit up with sun, then there's sun across the whole world, and we know that's not the case. So therefore, you must be public enemy number one. Did you ever receive anything personally from them, any kind of attacks on you personally for the stuff you put out there, which is just your video footage, but obviously which then disproved their model?
Yeah, I actually had no idea about the whole flat Earth thing at the time.
Really?
That was only probably the last 6 or 7 years that the flat Earth has really become a big thing. Prior to that, I was getting a reasonable number of inquiries about the hollow Earth.
Oh, really?
And if you don't know about that, that's the idea where the Earth is actually hollow and there's a floating sun in the middle, but the entrance is in Antarctica. So people were saying, have you seen the hole in Antarctica that leads to the hollow Earth? So,
like the anus to the world was in Antarctica.
Yeah. So then I also had quite a few people asking about, UFOs buried in the ice, discovering UFOs. And I don't like to diss people, but I just tell them, I've never seen anything personally. Who knows? There may be a UFO frozen in the ice somewhere. I think it's extremely unlikely, but it's possible. But personally, I've never seen anything weird like that. I find the natural world is already amazing enough myself.
Maybe we could do this. Maybe we could. And I know on your end, you've got some footage, and I believe yours is the footage that was shown in the documentary. I just want to make this clear. People are already talking about the footage that was edited. Is that the footage that's on YouTube that I've got, and the footage that you've got in the documentary?
In the documentary, there's a scene of the 24-hour sunlight that I filmed in McMurdo Station. Yeah,
let's show that while we're talking. So if I bring up your screen, you should be able to push play. Oh, let's just watch this bit, and then we can talk to it.
Check the time. It's just after 12 o'clock. It's 12 o'clock midnight though.
And you'll notice Observation Hill in the back, left picture of picture there, and there it is in the background,
so
on the right.
All right.
So people were complaining about how the clouds in the start of this shot matched the clouds at the end of the shot. And there's a reason for that, and that's that the original shot ran for a couple of days, but the editor decided he wanted to start with the same imagery in the background to just help give the visual flow. So what we actually did was cut it in the middle, and if you look super closely here, around about when the sun passes behind the light bulb, you see a little crossfade on the clouds in the background. And that's where we've actually joined the two ends of the clip together, and now we're going back around to the start of the clip. So from the point where the sun disappears behind Observation Hill again, we're seeing the same footage that was at the very start.
Right.
So these are the matching clouds here that people were complaining about.
So there is an edit.
Yeah.
There is an edit to that.
There's a cut in the middle, and that was, I didn't even think anything about it at the time, but the editor just said, it would be much better visually if we could start and stop on Observation Hill, because it was a continuous day and a half, and we were only going to show 24 hours. But then he said, well, it'd be much better if we start there and just loop the clip in the middle. So I didn't really think anything about it at the time. Just okay then.
Because you're sane, and you don't think that anyone would ever say you're a shill who has edited this to prove the Earth is not flat. So do you have the unedited footage of that we can have a look at? Well, why don't you find that? And while you're looking for that, just don't double click on it. Find it while you're looking for that. Let's look at this. Why don't you tell us what this other one is before I push play? Because this is a different time lapse with the clock in front of it. Because this one got any edits in it?
No, that's basically straight up as filmed.
All right, so let's push play on this. It'll go for a bit. This is another time lapse of the 24-hour sun, and then let's come back with a bit of a world exclusive. People who are the flat Earth debunkers will be salivating out there, and show them that 24-hour sun with no edit in it. Okay, but let's have a look at this one as well. So here's another one, which is.
Yeah, so what a lot of people were complaining about here is the sun rays looking fake, saying it's all computer generated, and why does the text drop behind the mountain and behind the watch? And well, the reason for that is us being artsy and creative. But the lens flares, people seem to think they're sun rays, but no, they're actually lens flares. That's why they behave in a static way. You take any good quality DSLR lens, crank it right down to its minimum aperture. It was f22 in this case, I think, from memory, and it will actually create those flares from the bright spots on the picture. And in this case, the number of flares will equal the number of aperture blades on the lens that you use. So that's why that's like that. And here's the actual video shot of the actual setup.
And if you had, I also think if you had this actually filming the filming, that would have been something that would have been fairly difficult to disprove as well. But there's just a clip of that at the end. Shall we do a world exclusive, Anthony, for all those people out there who think that that's fake because it's edited? Shall we show them the real deal?
Yeah. So let's just try and do the share screen here.
Try and do the share screen thing. And while you're doing that, I just want to say, while you're doing it, tell me when you're about to click it. To all these people, to Al, to Mike, to Trish, to Dumb Jezza, to all these names that are on here, who are all chatting away, to WS, who are saying to Flurfspective, who are chatting away here, to KMC. Thanks for joining us, and maybe some of you are actually here for this reason.
Right. So I guess you can see my screen there now.
Let's add to stream. Here we go.
Here we go. So this is the original footage, unedited. Straight out of the camera. So you can see it's so
when it goes past that light, that was where the edit happened last time. So if it doesn't edit this time, then this is the unedited version of it, and those clouds are going overhead.
The clouds are different there, so
the clouds are going overhead still.
Yeah, And I think it actually runs for nearly 2 days, this clip. So
Really?
and as you can see, this one, so the sun's passing behind the hill there.
So what's the name of the hill?
This is where Observation Hill. So that's the hill that Scotsmen would climb to when they're looking out towards the South Pole to see if they were returning, looking out across the ice shelf.
Hence the name, Observation Hill.
Yep. And that's where the memorial cross for Robert Scott is.
What do you personally find more spectacular, like in summer when you can see the amazing vistas, or in winter when you can see the amazing sky?
It's a little bit of both. It depends. Like, a lot of people just get stuck on the base. So so that was the unedited version, and so we'll just so we'll go back towards the end there. So where we actually started the edit, was we cut it there, and went back to the original bit at the start, which was earlier on, sort of thing. So so the actual bit we ended up using was here, starting here with a crossfade, I think. So then we cut it here to actually start the clip on the movie, played it around,
just
and then
that
when
window.
it went behind,
maximize that video window, just so we can see it clearly.
So and you can actually see me in the very last frame there. So so we cut it there. So this is basically the start point, start finish point of the original clip, whereas the bit where we actually provided the cut. So that's the bit where we start the actual video there in the movie itself, which is basically in the middle.
So I would think most sensible people would understand why you made the edit for the sake of the production. I would also think most of them would then see this in collaboration with the other one with a watch in front, and that would be enough to actually let them to say there's no argument. I tell you, if you don't mind, do you think that maybe I could grab that clip off you as well? Because some people are saying there was a bit of a glitch when they were watching it. If you let me have that, then I'll put it up on our YouTube and Facebook channel, and then people can see it for themselves to make sure. Because what I don't want to have happen now, Anthony, is like people go, "Oh, that's rubbish. There's still glitches in it. There's still a jump here and a jump there. It's bollocks." So if you're okay with that, hopefully not too many royalties.
Yeah, you'll see there's you'll see there's like a missing frame near the start of the clip where the camera failed to fire. So there's the color bars there that the Adobe software drops in if it detects something wrong, so you can see it. But it's the rest of the clip is just straight out of the camera. That's why you'll see it's actually a bit overexposed in some places, because it's before I've done any color grading or anything.
So the other thing is, just to be really blunt, right? Because we want this question. You've been there for so many summers. It is. Can you confirm that it's daylight for 24 hours through several months of the year?
Oh, yeah. It's at Scott Base. It's typically around about the third week of October, around about the 22nd or so, right through to about the 22nd of February. The sun will be above the horizon for basically 4 months. And then you'll have about 2 months where the sun is rising and setting. And then around about the 22nd, 23rd of April, the sun sets for the last time, and it doesn't come up again until around about the 22nd of August. And then you have another couple of months where it's slowly getting higher and higher in the sky until October, when it's finally above the sky horizon 24 hours a day. Whereas at the South Pole, we only have one sunrise and one sunset each year, so the sun is actually up for 6 months and then down for 6 months. So it just depends on your latitude, whereas at the edge of the Antarctic Circle, the middle of winter, you'll just have a day when the sun doesn't rise, and the middle of summer, you'll have the day when the sun doesn't set, sort of thing.
This is the thing for me, Anthony, and I have been someone who has. I used to work as a talkback host on News Talk ZB. That's sort of where I started to get into conversation, conversing with people of interesting opinions. I still actually really want to understand why people believe what they believe. Like, I think it's unequivocal that there's 24-hour sun in Antarctica, which means that the model that they're currently putting out simply doesn't work. So the most logical, as Occam's razor talks about, with the fewest number of assumptions, is that the Earth is a globe, no matter what else is said. So I don't know much about. Does it annoy you at all? I mean, you're a documentary filmmaker, to be dragged into what seems to be kind of silly, petty, bullshit going on with people who think that they know more. Like, there will be people now who think that either you're a liar, that you're not telling the truth. Oh, yeah. But what I would say to those people is they're being intellectually dishonest. Because really, unless they were you, what we've just seen is about as good as you can get for evidence of the claim, other than standing there yourself. And if that evidence would stand up in court, let me put it that way. So the intellectual dishonesty is the thing that frustrates me. And I how do you feel about being dragged into it? You didn't want to be.
It's No, I was actually quite surprised. Actually, I had no idea when I posted that other clip on YouTube that this whole flat Earth thing was a real big deal. And I think a lot of people there are just doing it for a bit of a laugh. But yeah, there are a lot of people that take it deadly seriously. But I generally don't bother engaging with them anymore, because I know whatever I say, I'm just going to end up getting called a liar, and what's the point? So I don't know if you've read the video description of the clip on YouTube. If you expand the full description, I've actually written in there, well, put your money where your mouth is, book a cruise trip to Antarctica, prove the video fake, and I'll reimburse your travel costs.
There you go. In the summer time at Scott Base Antarctica, the sun, yada, 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 camera, yada, yada, yada. P.S. Flat Earth people, if you're very entertaining with your comments, my challenge to you, put your money where your mouth is, book a cruise ship holiday to Antarctica below the Antarctic Circle to prove the video is wrong. I'll even reimburse you your cost of your trip if you can prove the sun does not show this as shown in the video. So, and you put edit years later, crickets, sound of crickets. No one's taking you up on the challenge. So okay, so let me ask you this as well. Even though it feels like we are sort of beating a dead horse now. The flat earthers talk about an ice wall being the thing that holds the water in, and they use often, pardon me, is my Pepsi Max coming back to get me? Pictures like this, which is one of your pictures, right? What I want to know is, when you're flying over and flying into Antarctica, is there a lot of land or ice that is water level? Because the way they portray it is there's a ring around the Earth like this. Now, to me, if there's a whole bunch of land first or ice first that builds up to a picture like this ice, or there's gaps in walls like this, then that's also debunking this idea of an ice wall.
Yeah, there's a lot of land. The majority of the coast, it depends. Yeah, like the Ross Ice Shelf is the size of France, basically. So, in the Great Barrier, as they call it, is of course the name that comes from Scott and Shackleton's time, and of course, they sort of latch onto this Great Barrier ice wall thing. But even Scott and Shackleton were traveling over the top of it and going to the, making their way to the South Pole. It was never ever indicated as being anything else than the edge of the ice shelf, the Ross Ice Shelf in particular. And there's huge, massive amounts of coastal areas where the ocean comes right up to the land masses. So yes, a combination of both.
Only to specifically answer some of the flat Earth conversations going on at the moment. Someone says, a person called Gleam says 95% is ice wall. From your personal observations of being at or on Antarctica, however you want to word that, how much have you seen of the coastline would be something like an ice wall versus not?
I'm not sure. Well, certainly the entire Antarctic Peninsula is pretty much just mountains with a few glaciers flowing off here and there.
So not ice wall.
No. Then there's like the Ross ice shelf itself. Yeah, that is like a big ice wall. You know, it's a impressive sight. But if you travel up the coast on the west of the Ross Sea, it's mostly just mountains with a few glaciers flowing out. So it depends on the location. Whereas south of the Antarctic Peninsula, you've got the big ice shelves there as well. So it just depends on the area.
Finally, thank you so much for your time today, Anthony. This has been really interesting. I know the last kind of 10 minutes has been a bit weird for some people, but it's I still find it interesting. How many days / weeks / months / years do you think you've actually been at Antarctica? What I want to get is your expertise there and how long you've been there versus people who think they know the answer because someone said something once that sort of sounded like it on an internet chat room.
Well, cumulatively over the last over 20 years, I've spent I added it up recently, and it was just under 10 years physically in Antarctica. And I think after the summer, I will actually be over the 10 years physically in Antarctica. So I've spent 10 winters there and a bunch of summer seasons. And my wife, Christine, has spent 9 winters there. So, it's a pretty decent chunk of time.
10 years. I've my youngest child's 12. So you've spent not far off her whole lifespan on Antarctica and multiple places as well. You've been at Murdoch, you've been at Scott. Have you ever visited the other places? Like been around the other places? Have you ever gone from one side to the other? Have you?
I've spent most of my time at Scott Base and McMurdo Station, but I've been on a couple of trips down the Antarctic Peninsula and spent a little bit of time at the South Pole itself as well. The whole general area around the Ross Island area and, the Ross Ice Shelf, the McMurdo Dry Valleys, Mount Erebus, that whole area, I've pretty much been everywhere that there are science events happening, where there are seals being studied, where there's volcanoes being studied, where there's geology and ice shelves being studied, because pretty much everywhere the researchers go, they need their communications equipment. So when I was working as a comms tech, one of the first things you do at the start of the season is go in and install a radio repeater on top of the nearest mountain and make sure their gear is going to work at the research site so they can talk back to the base and do their daily check-ins and organize the helicopter schedules, that sort of thing.
Well, look, I mean, there's probably obviously people who have been there for more than 10 years, but I don't think I'll ever meet anyone. Chances are I'll never meet anyone that's got more experience at Antarctica than you yourself. It's fantastic talk. I love that kind of New Zealand has quite a close affiliation with Antarctica, probably because of our location in the world. So thanks so much for joining us. It's been a huge amount of fun. Even this end bit, and I know for a lot of people this end bit's a bit weird, but even this end bit's been a bunch of fun. I think maybe, I don't know, I know that you said before we started live streaming that we'd need to check with Antarctic New Zealand, but if we could figure out a way to connect with you in a bit of a 5-minute live stream at like 3 o'clock in the morning in the middle of summer to just go, look, there's my base and there's the sun. I mean, if we need another nail, that would be kind of cool. But obviously you can't answer that, and I won't put that to you now, but I'll certainly be chasing you up on that. But if I could grab that video off you, I will put it on the YouTube channel if you're okay with that, and the Facebook page.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then we'll, I don't know, maybe we'll talk again soon. Maybe you should always stay in touch and let us know what you've got coming up and what videos or movies your footage is being used, and we'll tell the world, we'll tell everybody about it when it's happening. But for now, Anthony Powell, thank you so much for joining us. I've really enjoyed spending some time with you. It's been a lot of fun, and the last thing is, I was thinking about the All Blacks today, going, oh, we're doing a podcast on Saturday night and the All Blacks playing, but I found out today they're playing tomorrow night. So it's a perfect weekend. I get to talk to you tonight and watch the All Blacks tomorrow night and have some fun along the way. So thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, my pleasure.